Was that not worth the price of entry? Thank you, Destin and Karis. I won't say you look like Edith and Archie, but you sound like them. You're probably wondering why we sang the theme to All in the Family, Those Were the Days. On Christmas Eve, some of you are even bold enough to voice it out loud. Yeah. During this season of Advent, it was only a couple weeks ago, the creator of that television show passed away, Norman Lear. He was 101. And of course, when your mind is in the middle of this season that you've been immersed in, you start to draw parallels. You're thinking about, so I was thinking about Scrooge all through this season of Advent, and I don't know, was it just 2 weeks ago that Norman Lear passed away, something like that? It was just literally a matter of days. And it occurred to me that Norman Lear was a Charles Dickens. We've been thinking about Charles Dickens. We've been finding ways in the 5 short chapters of that novella to draw those lines between Dickens's time, our current time, and what transformation looks like. Pastor Corey, when he preached on the Sunday of, it was love, the Love Sunday. And he talked about how Charles Dickens had the experience of his family actually going to the poorhouse when he was a child and him having to work in what was essentially child labor conditions for his keep, and the rest of his family was in the poorhouse, and how that made such an impression on him that he wrote about the characters in the Christmas Carol story because he had experienced some of those things firsthand. And it talked about the education system. And then we think, oh, this is all solved. This is the 21st century now. That was the 19th century. That was 150 years ago. We couldn't have conditions like that today. And then we look at some of the inequities in our educational system and the ways that we treat our children. What Charles Dickens was really successful at doing was telling stories that people recognized. On my first Sunday, when we started this on the first Sunday of Advent, I told a little bit how initially Charles Dickens had planned not to write this full-length story, this 5-chapter novella, but he was just going to write this pamphlet on how England should recognize some of the social problems and the social inequities going on around them. And then he realized that if he told a story, that it would have more of an impact. And so he started to write the story, and the story grew and grew, and it turned into this story populated with characters, someone who was very wealthy, but who didn't have a lot of empathy or compassion. And all these other characters, certainly the ones that he barely paid, Bob Cratchit in his office and Bob Cratchit's family who struggled to get by. We got glimpses of those when we learned that Bob Cratchit's older daughter went and worked in some shop of some kind, having to work to contribute to the family income. But then when Scrooge has these dreams, we are exposed to the real underbelly of inequities. He sees people who weren't even seen by their own society as he told those stories. We know that when we tell stories, we pay attention in a different way. And that's why I thought of Archie Bunker when Norman Lear passed away, because I hadn't paid attention to Norman Lear's life a whole lot, but I was a child of the 70s. I grew up with All in the Family, and so many others of those Norman Lear sitcoms. Some of you younger ones, my kids included, went like, what's All in the Family? Who is that, right? But we know that even Charles, or even Norman Lear, his own storytelling evolved out of the beginning and his television success with All in the Family. Came all these other stories that Norman Lear told. Good Times. Do you remember that one? What about Sanford and Son? What about Moving On Up? You know, the Jeffersons, right? Maude. Set right here in Indiana, one day at a time. All of these were stories of families and people who made us a little bit uncomfortable for some reason. Maybe it was some bias that we held a little bit like a character. Archie Bunker surely had his biases. Maybe it was a situation that was different. The Jeffersons in Good Times were the first stories about all black families. One Day at a Time, set in the Midwest, a divorced mother raising her children alone without a husband. It was not Leave It to Beaver anymore. We had to be pushed just a little bit. This is what Charles Dickens did, and this is what Norman Lear did. I found out when I had no idea that not only was Norman Lear this storyteller and sort of pushing with stories, but he was actually very politically active as well. And he found ways to challenge us, to see things that we didn't see. Did you know that One Day at a Time was rebooted and it went to streaming services, and instead of being a single white mom and two daughters in the Midwest, it became a Latinx mom with a son and a daughter and a grandmother who reminded me of my grandmother, by the way, living in Miami, who was an Army veteran, who suffered PTSD and who had LGBTQ child that came out and who had to deal with different kinds of things that even that first One Day at a Time family didn't deal with. Always pushing questions that our society was just a little bit uncomfortable being faced with. I love how both of these storytellers, Charles Dickens, Norman Lear, ask us to see things that we don't see. And you say, Pastor, you're getting a little political. You're talking about LGBTQ folks, and you're talking about race, and you're talking about all these other things why are we talking about these on Christmas Eve? Let me tell you, folks, the gospel is political. The gospel is the first time that the story is told about a situation that society wasn't comfortable with and shouldn't have been comfortable with. And you heard that in both of those readings tonight. We were given actually 3 readings. We were given the Mary's story from Luke 1, and then the reading of the shepherds in the field. We're so familiar with that in Luke 2, and we're given the reading of the wise folks who come and visit Jesus and give him the gifts in Matthew 2. And after, as I was thinking about this, I shouldn't have cut out the Mary story, because actually it's Mary's voice that signals the beginning of it all. That God's politics are about a world turned upside down. Mary starts by singing her song when she is told of her pregnancy. She starts singing her song where the rich are brought low and the lowly are raised up. And then Luke goes on to tell us how. And we have a manger scene here. We have a tapestry in the back. I know there's one there. There's one sitting on there made of beautiful felt by a church member that was just given to me today, and I had to let you all see that. We have all these very cute little scenes of shepherds and sheep and crafty little houses. And we forget that that is a depiction of a very political act. Of a God who says that the world is turned upside down. A God who says that somebody who is an unwed, pregnant teen mom, we might call her a mop, is the one who will usher in the greatest act of love that this world will see. And who will get a front row seat, the very first, to see that event happen? It is a night shift worker, somebody working the graveyard shift, somebody working for somebody else who's probably at home, warm, snug in their bed. Well, they're doing the job that nobody else wants to do, keeping the sheep from running away in the middle of the night. And who is it that finances God's economy of love? It is someone who comes from another country, who has a different religion, who is trying to figure out what the universe is saying to them, and they come and they give to this family so that they can be saved from the empire, from the Herod who wants to kill that child, and finance their trip, even though they too will then again become foreigners in a foreign language, so that the Christ child can be spared. God says, look closely at the things that we are not comfortable with. When Scrooge is visited in his last dream, and he sees that there is this possibility that his life will be meaningless if he doesn't make some choices and some changes. And he sees a family who is going to not survive at all. And he remembers that he had said to Marley in the first visitation, there's a poorhouse, there's a place for these people, there's a solution. And he has learned that this is not an equitable or a solution that really works for humankind. His eyes have been opened. His heart has been opened. And this is what we are invited to see as we have explored this season of change and transformation in somebody who we still have. Scrooge, we don't remember Scrooge for the things that he was changed into. We continue to insist that when you call somebody a Scrooge, they're the first Scrooge, the tight-fisted one, the heartless one, the penny-pinching one. And we forget that Scrooge is the one whose heart was open and transformed. And he did it not just because he cared about Bob Cratchit's family and Tiny Tim, but he did something that changed the outcome for everyone. I mean, he goes in on the day after Christmas. Bob Cratchit's a little late, and of course he plays this little game with them, and he says, "You're late, Cratchit." And of course he's afraid that he's going to lose his job. And of course this is now a joke with him. And then he's very jolly and merry, and he finally puts coal on the fire and warms the place up. But the most important thing that he does is he gives Bob a raise. He changes the outcome because his heart has been changed. And this is what we celebrate. Not just the Scrooge that was changed, but the ability for us to see, to open our eyes, to be confronted by the things that we are uncomfortable with, and say, how can we take part in seeing the way that God invites us to see? To see shepherds as being valuable, to see foreigners as being needed, to see unwed teen pregnant mothers as being capable of miracles. We see that the most important thing that God created, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, not only gives up his privilege to enter into our existence, God says, not only do I love these folks too, but I need them. I will use them. I will honor them. I hope that you will see, like Scrooge, like Archie, who has to confront their privilege and their position. Because the one who had the most privilege and the highest position gave all of that up and entered into our space tonight so that this world could be changed. That is what we are invited to do tonight as we prepare to usher in that birth, that moment of love, that moment when privilege was let go, when power was put aside, and the Christ entered into this world in the most humble way. And we are invited to celebrate that tonight. Amen.